All right. Hello, and welcome to our training event today for our business managers and any other school leaders that want to join us. Today we are talking about fundraising ideas. So if you're joining us live, welcome. If you're watching us on a recording later, thank you for joining us, and we hope this information is useful to you. We will start by turning the time over to Stuart Acopia, who is a member of the State Charter School Board staff, and he will be leading this training. So Stuart, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Marie. All right, let me go ahead and get started here. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Okay, just want to make sure, can everyone see that? All right, great. So just to let everyone know how this training topics kind of came about. We do, our monthly trainings, and for the April training, we actually sent out a survey and had business administrators send us some ideas. We just want to make sure that we're listening to the field and getting ideas of things to train on. One idea that came in was, someone talked about, or asked, if we can do a training on fundraising efforts, and it's something that's, as staff, we were not as familiar with, but we did our research and we're like, okay, this is something that will be exciting. We also have the topic of internal controls, which, Smriti will be talking about. And there was also a lot of questions related to SPED. And instead of us trying to answer the SPED questions, we invited someone for SPED to come in and help us out and get the training on those things. So we let them know the questions that were asked. So just before we jump in, just want to give a quick, rundown of the agenda. I'm going to start off with, how to run a successful fundraising program. And then Smriti is going to talk about
Stuart, I'm sorry to interrupt. It sounds like some of our participants are having trouble hearing you. Maybe if you can just speak a little closer to your microphone. Okay. I'm not sure if that's just one or if everybody's experiencing that.
Okay. I hope unless I pick up my laptop and move it closer, I don't know. But okay, I'll speak a little louder. Is that a little better?
Yes, they said it is better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so just a quick agenda. I'm going to talk about how to run a successful fundraising program, and I'm going to pass you to Smriti. She's going to do talk to us about internal controls, and then we'll have Corey from our SPED department, and he's going to talk to you about the SPED questions that came in and just some other SPED related topics. So I will go ahead and jump in and get started here. Okay, so just for a definition and about fundraising, a fundraising or fundraising activity, as you can see here, it means an activity or event, sponsored by the school. They use the students to generate funds. If you're using students to generate funds, then that involves, school fee rules and all those type of things. So this training is really focused on the fundraising activities that does not involve students. So when you don't involve students, then you don't have, the rules for school fees do not apply. So just want to make that clarity out first. So this is, we're focusing on the fundraising that does not involve students. Board rules for, school fees and fundraising, if it involves students and all that, 277-407. Also 277-113, that's the whole LEA fiscal and auditing policies. And it is a requirement that each school has a fundraising policy and a donation and gift policy. USBE does have models, best practices policy that you can use to craft your policy. I have the link here, or you can just Google on USBE's website. But this is, we're going to be talking about the fundraising activity, like I said, with our students. And then we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So as far as the donations, we looked at the program code 1920, and this is where schools report the private donations that come in, that come into their program. So we looked at a couple of years, and the reason why we selected 2018 and 2021 was 2018 was to try to get an idea of what happened before the pandemic, and 2021 was to get an idea of what, how things are going on after the pandemic. So as you can see here, just, in general, our schools, get about 0.5% of their revenues from private donations. Now, what I want to point out here, though, is if you can see, and within the 2 years, they were kind of similar. But I think what's important, though, is the mean, I'm just going to use 2018. The mean in 2018 was 0.4%. I'm sorry, the median was 0.4%. The mean was 1.2%, 1.28%. So, this tells us that half of our schools, collect or receive less than 0.4% of their revenues and private donations, and the other half receives more than 0.4%. But with this mean of 1.28%, that tells us that there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of schools that are doing getting private donations, they have found ways to be successful in it. And this is to encourage some of our schools to say, hey, half of you are getting 0.4%. There's opportunities that you can look into programs, look into things that to fundraise, because there's opportunities out there. And we'll be talking about some of these things as you can see here. Okay, so fundraising usually starts with the board, and typically charter schools, when charter schools are looking for their governing boards, they're typically not what the type of people that are on these boards are typically not the people in your typical nonprofit boards. A typical nonprofit board probably is very, very familiar with fundraising. It's probably something they do all the time. While with your charter school governing boards, you're probably going to have a lot of parents, a lot of community members, a lot of educators. So there might be a little bit of a disconnect, where they don't really, they're not familiar, they don't have the expertise. So just want to say that schools can leverage the talent that already exists. You may have one or two board members that have this expertise, or just perhaps maybe when schools are looking to recruit new board members, these are something that you might want to look to. This is a skill that we think is important, to have one or two board members on your board with this type of expertise. Now, we do understand that some LEAs just may not fundraise for certain reasons. There's multiple reasons out there, but these are 4 reasons that we've kind of just thought about. For example, a lot of people don't like to ask for money. Maybe it makes them feel uncomfortable, and they just just don't like to do it. Keep in mind that it's not about you. When you're fundraising, it's about the students, and you're doing this for a bigger cause. Some LEAs may not like to fundraise because it takes too much time. And that's a valid point. So one way to look at it is do it all the time, or decide ahead of time the amount of time that you want to dedicate to this, so that you've already decided and you're not going to go over what you already decided. While I was working on this presentation, I reached out to a few of our LEAs that were very successful. And I asked them some of these questions. I got some of their feedback. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is because one LEA that's very, very successful, he mentioned that he does it all the time. So he doesn't feel like fundraising is like a separate activity. He just does it all the time, anywhere, everywhere. Okay, so moving on. Another reason why some LEAs might not like to fundraise is maybe because they don't really know how to, and that's a fair point. We've prepared this presentation to give you some guidelines, and really there's a lot of information online for and different strategies and different things that work. So that's a great resource. Another example is maybe that's someone else's job. People like, hey, I'll let the board do it, or I'll let the director do it, or the business person. It's it's not my job. But we're here to say it's everybody's job. Going back to the first point, it's not about you, it's about a bigger cause. It's about the students, the programs at charter school that you're very passionate in working and building. So keep these things in mind. So if these challenges come up, you have a train of thought to help change your train of thought here. So now we're going to move on to talk about how do you build, and how do you get started with this? So we've come up with 3 components, when you're designing your fundraising program. You want to, the 3 components, are why, who, and the how. The why, that's where you define your motivation, and that's when you get your board buy-in. The who, that's when you talk about your roles and responsibilities, make sure you assign those, and everyone knows their individual roles and responsibilities. And the how, that's your strategy, your policies, your available tools and resources, and those things. So we're going to jump in and talk about each one of those things in a little more depth. So when you're defining your motivation and trying to get board buy-in, you want to be able to tell the story of the school. You want to be able to get everybody on board, including your board members, your administration, school staff, teachers, parents, and community members. Only people that parents of students in the school. We're talking the entire community members. And it is important that when you're defining your motivation, you really want to be able to reconnect with your passion and be able to stress about how the fundraising program that you're working on is going to impact the school and this program. You want to be able to demonstrate that passion and be able to show that. And another another thing to think about is addressing the uncomfortable factor. When you're trying to get your board's buy-in, like I mentioned earlier, fundraising can maybe be uncomfortable. People don't want to do it. So the thing is to just address it early in the stage. And one way to address it is, you can maybe do this at a board retreat or, per se, but you really just want to ask them, how they felt when they gave to a cause that they were passionate about, so maybe ask them, the last time you gave this a cause that you were passionate about, describe how you felt, describe, what that did for you. Chances are they will be able to bridge that gap to where they can see, the impact of what they did or how they felt. And that hopefully helps to alleviate, helps to decrease some of that uncomfortable factor. When you're talking about your roles and responsibility, I just want to start off by saying, you really have to make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to do and it's clear to everyone their individual roles and responsibilities. I use the example, you've probably already all heard this example. If there's maybe an emergency and I look around and say, someone call 911, chances are everyone's going to look around and expect someone else to call 911. But if I really want that, I look at someone and say, hey, you call 911. And that person, will definitely do it. So that's why it's important to make sure that everyone clearly understands their roles and responsibility. Fundraising is a team sport. It's something that, you don't want to put it all on one individual because that individual could get burned out, that individual could lose motivation. So really it's something that, when you get everyone's buy-in, look at it as a team sport. You're doing this together. As I've mentioned earlier, of course, you want to start with your board. Perhaps you can have a fundraising committee, or we've talked to some LEAs that have like a parent-teacher organization. Some use volunteers. There's different ways to get to decide the people that are going to help you with this program. But when you've decided who is part of the committee, who is part of the group and the team, you want to make sure that every person understands their role, and it has to be clearly understood what their roles and responsibilities are. Now, we've also, now we're going to jump into the how. How do you run a successful fundraising program? Here we've come up with, these are, simple ideas that, you can really implement right now, that you can implement today. Participating in the Given Tuesdays, registering with Amazon Smile, registering with your local supermarkets and retail stores, coming up with, saving coupon books that you can sell, or you can register for the Donor's Choice. I want to point out that with the Donor's Choice, we know of a school that in their first year, they were able to secure 35 grants in their classrooms. So, one thing I'm trying to stress out with this, presentation is that there are opportunities out there, and we just want to, let you guys know that, go out there because there's really opportunities out there for schools to tap into more fundraising. Like I mentioned earlier, you can create a parent-teacher organization. These are just very simple ideas that, probably won't take a lot of effort, but you can start these today. However, some of these simple ideas, just to be honest, may not bring in that much money. It's just probably not, but, hey, at least you're not leaving anything on the table. You can, this is something you can do and implement pretty quickly. Okay, so moving on, when you're deciding the how, you want to choose your focus. which groups, who are you going to focus on? We've divided your focus groups into 5 different categories. Number 1 is your individual donors. Then you also have, your community events. You also have, foundations. You have corporations, and you have like local and national governmental bodies. So we're going to talk about each individual one and just kind of the challenges and things about each one. So starting off with your individual donors, one challenge, with this is there's questionable return on investment. A lot of times you're spending years, building, nurturing these relationships, and it's you may get, you may be able to get them to donate. You may not. You just never really know. We do have one LEA that told us about a situation where an individual donor, they've been working with them for years and years, and then finally, almost like in year 3 or 4, they donated, and they donated a substantial sum. I mean, we're talking 6 figures, but who knows if that would have ever happened. They were successful, but like we said, there is some questionable return on investment here. Another thing that when you're working, if you're deciding to do an individual donor campaign, another thing you can do is just a direct ask. We've talked to some LEAs that they just they reach out and they just hold monthly drives and just try and get parents or people to commit to a monthly donation. All right, so moving on to the next group is you can focus on community events. Now, the challenge with community events is also the return on investment can be questionable, and they can be difficult to schedule. When you're doing some of these community events, you might have to work with your local county for permits and all those kind of things. So those are some challenges there. Some of our LEAs that have been successful with doing community events, some of them do like a fall event and a spring event. When they're doing these events, they involve the entire community, not just the parents of the students. So people that live, people that are around the community. I talked to one school where in their spring gala event, they said about 400 people attend, and half the people that attend don't even have students or families there. So, think outside the box. It's not just, you're not just always going to focus on, your parents or all those people. Your local community, they have an interest to see the school being successful. They have an interest to see, people getting educated. So, this is a good way to involve them. It's also a good way to engage your community and, just, to have that relationship with them. It might take several tries to get it right. The first time you do this, it's a pretty big endeavor. So, but, as you continue to stick with it and you continue to, work with it, you're going to get better, and, it's going to become more effective. One thing to point out is, you want to make this fun, and don't make it sound like it is a fundraiser, because I don't know, if there was a community event and maybe I didn't have children that went to that school and they announced as a fundraiser, I might personally not be as interested in going like, yeah, okay, but if they made it fun and maybe perhaps they invited some food trucks and maybe they have some artisans there, people that they've, fun activities, then it sounds like, hey, I can go out there and go check it out and just see what this community event is, and maybe, purchase some food, purchase some items. Maybe perhaps you've already arranged to get some percentage of sales from these vendors at this community events. So now it becomes a fun community event and you can raise money through this. We've had schools that, do very, very successful fall events and very, very successful spring events, and they're able to, raise a good sum of money with these events. Just another idea with your community events, you can have vendors to donate items, and you can do auction, silent auctions or resell them, and at these community events. The next grouping is foundation groups. These are things like your charter school growth fund, and there's there's a few other foundations. These are like your bigger foundations, like your Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't know if that's still around, but just some of these big foundations. The one challenge with trying to fundraise with these foundation grants is very, very competitive. They they might make you do a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of steps, and there's a lot of, it's just very competitive, you're applying, and there's a lot of things you have to do. But however, it can be successful. We talked to one LEA that they received $250,000, over the span of 3 years. I mean, that to me is significant. That's almost one person's salary for 3 years. And if you're an LEA that maybe targets a certain demographic, or a certain type of population, maybe you can look at, say, okay, well, what type of national foundations support these demographics? And if that's something that who you target, is a very effective way to say, hey, I target this demographic, and apply for the grant. And there are opportunities, even though it is competitive, but if you're ended up with the $250,000 donation, to me that's awesome. That's a really good, that to me will be a successful program. Now, the next grouping is your corporations. And this is what actually got me excited when I was thinking about creating this presentation, is because I know that Utah is growing. We have the Silicon Slopes, we have a lot of people moving here, businesses are booming in the States. So there's a lot of opportunities, and a lot of these corporations, they really do want to give. You have to reach out to them. Some of these get tax breaks, tax benefits, from doing donations. A lot of these corporations, they do want to partner. So maybe you're asking, okay, how do I get started with this? What do I need to do? One thing you can do is just look to your network, the parents, your board, your community, and just ask them, hey, go to your employer and ask to see if they do matching grants. We've noticed that a lot of corporations, a lot of companies, if their employees donate to a cause, they will match. So it's simple to say, just, hey, go ask, maybe your board and your parents, ask your corporations and see if they match a grant. If they do, then, we'll encourage you to donate, because you're going to get a match from your employer. So these are just, good ideas, good things that, good approaches that you can take, when you're trying to reach out to corporations. Now, I do want to point out that, when corporations are given money, these are for-profit entities. So, they might come with some strings attached. They might have some terms and conditions that they want, if they're going to donate money to you. So you want to make sure that any terms or conditions that come with receiving these funds align with your mission and vision. You don't want to be strayed from mission and vision just because you're getting some, donations from a corporation. I do want to point out, another example of an LEA that was very successful with this is, we have an LEA that gets free lunches for their students because there's a restaurant out there that donates 3 weeks of lunches to the school, and the school pays for one. So, they're basically buying one, getting 3 for free. I mean, and when I asked him, how are you able to secure this? He said, I asked them, and they were willing to do this. So, just make sure that, you are getting the word out there, you're asking, you're constantly just, supporting the school, you're showing your passion, and then letting them know how their donation can impact the students. To go on even further about another example where a school was successful, is we had a school where, same thing here with their food program, they needed some ovens, and they went back to the same restaurant and said, do you have any ovens that you're willing to give us? Maybe one that you're going to replace. Lo and behold, the restaurant donates some ovens, and to even make it even sweeter, they even offered to have their technicians to come out to the school and install it for the school. So these are examples. These are things that have been done locally with your peers. These are not these are not examples from across California or wherever. No, these are SESB schools, and these are examples from what I've heard. The last group, is your local and national government grants and organizations. I didn't really find too much information here, but these include things like your Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Utah, perhaps Utah Pride Center, Waterford.org. The challenge here is it might be a little bit slow, and you might need some specific expertise with knowing how to apply for these. So, charter schools are already understaffed, so it might be hard to get some of these expertise to do the grant writing and to be able to do to be able to do the application the way it needs to go. You can get volunteers to do this. It's not easy to get volunteers. It's not easy to secure them. It's not easy to keep them motivated, but that's just one option. So try and get volunteers so that they can perhaps help you with some of these, grant writing. So one may ask, which one's the best one? What should I choose? Which one's more effective? And one way to do it, you can come up with a simple decision matrix. Come up with several of your ideas that maybe you want to pursue. Do a decision matrix, based on maybe how much potential dollars we raised, the level of effort, required time, probability of success. You can add other factors here, and then you can come up with a scoring system that you feel like, okay, well, this is probably our best opportunity here. In a perfect world, you'll have an idea that has the potential to raise the highest amount of funds, has the lowest amount of effort, requires the least amount of time, has a very high probability of success. Chances are, that's a unicorn, probably does not exist, but at least this gives you some way to be able to analyze and look through, look through some of your ideas to decide, which one perhaps you want to pursue. I just want to also caution you that, you don't want to do everything. You don't want to do every single thing out there, because that can be just a little bit, it can be difficult, and also you're probably not able to focus your energy on one decision idea. So just want to say, when you do decide, it's probably a little better to focus on one, keep working at it, and then, if it works, stick with it. If it doesn't, change, but just try to not do everything all at once, because that might cause you to lose focus. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the risks of fundraising, because, sounds all good and great, but there's got to be some risks. So one of the risks, we came up with 5 risks. One of the risks is the fact that, potentially the dollar raised may not justify the time involved. And that's a very valid risk. But that is a risk that you have to take. That's a risk that you have to decide ahead of time and decide, what resources you want to dedicate to this. It's, like I pointed out earlier, if you've already decided the amount of time you want to put towards this, then, decide, don't do more. You've already put it forward, and it's a risk you have to take. You'll never know what program would work or doesn't work. It's just a risk that you have to take. Another risk here is that, you can burn people out, because it is a lot of work, and that is very, very valid. That is very, very true. So, we want to say, be honest with yourself and be honest with the people working on this fundraising program. Help them, let them know that, yeah, this is a very possibility. Be cognizant that, they can be burned out. Check in with them often, see how these things are going. Another risk is over commercialization of your brand. You don't want to look like a sellout, like, you're getting some money from, I don't know, I'm just going to use an example, I don't know, McDonald's. I'm just throwing it out there. You don't want big McDonald's signs all over your school, so be cognizant of not weakening your brand or looking like you're over commercializing your brand. So one way to, alleviate this risk is ensure that your mission and vision is always coming through in all your fundraising efforts. Always keep that in mind. And if it's not shining through, make sure that it is, so you want to tailor this, and whatever you decide, it has to be able to improve and strengthen your mission and vision. Another risk here is lack of personal engagements. People can lose focus, and that's why we say, only do what you care about. Only do things that you feel that you can keep the enthusiasm high. Another risk is that fundraising efforts could be disruptive. They could be disruptive to your school. These are real valid risks. So one way to alleviate this risk is ensure that your fundraising efforts aren't disrupting your education process, and that they have education merit. So these are like checks and balances that you can do, and things that you can be aware of, because these are risks that happen with when you're trying to fundraise. All right. So I did mention that I talked to a lot of successful LEAs, that have successful fundraising programs. Just to give you guys an example, we have one LEA that I believe is in 2021 received 16% of their revenues in private donations. I mean, that is, I'm not saying everyone needs to do that or you need to go out there and do it. No, but that's to show you that there's someone that got 15% of their revenues. We also, and in the top percentages, we have 3 schools that get over 10% of their revenues in private donations. So, we met with some of these schools and said, what works, what doesn't work, give us some tips, so we can present to our school. So I went through and I've outlined 20, things that you can do, 20 tips, and we'll talk about them, very briefly. These are in no particular order, so we're just going to kind of just jump through them. First off, you have to open your mouth. Tell your story, what you're about and why it matters. Don't overthink it and don't be scared to ask. I give you the example of the school that got the ovens, for donated. They had to ask. I mean, no one's gonna know that the school needs an oven, so don't overthink it. Just ask out. Just ask. Be able to share, be able to tell the passion, be able to share what the school does and how it's going to impact your school. Get the word out. We move on to number 2. Get the word out. Some people still think charters are private schools and they're privately funded and all that. Get the word out there. Charter schools are public schools. And be like, going back again, stress and be able to talk about your passion and why your efforts is how it's going to impact your school. The third tip here is invite people to come and see what you're doing. Trying to have well-known people come and visit and tour your school. Then you can use that to name drop. I give some examples here, like Governor Cox or The Rock. I mean, how cool would that be if you're able to say, hey, The Rock came and toured our school? I mean, right there, people are just going to be excited. So, so try and get, people to come in and tour your school, be able to show that excitement and what you're doing. Now, number 4, you don't have to do this all by yourself. Like we talked about, using a parent teaching organization or maybe getting volunteers, using your board. But just keep in mind that, you don't have to do this all by yourself, and just be honest, with the people that you are, trying to get in to do some fundraising for you. Number 5, get out of the office and have a relationship with your local community. When I talked to this LEA that had over 15% of private donations, he let me know that he's constantly trying to promote the school. He said, if there is a board that needs to be sat on or some type of a task force or anything, he puts himself out there, and he's just constantly out there, constantly telling people what he does and building a relationship with the local community. And he said you'd be surprised, once you're able to establish a relationship, people actually do want to support you. They actually start to get more yeses and nos. Number 6, don't take money that tries to influence your goals or strays you away from your charter. For example, a corporation might donate and maybe they want super high academics, and that might be in their terms and conditions. Well, maybe what if you're a school that focuses on, credit recovery and people that, high risk community. You may not have that, high graduation percentage, and now you're trying to get students that maybe have high graduation percentage, or maybe not. So it could change, or it could actually try to stray you away from your goals. So keep that in mind. And like I said, your mission and vision has to come through. If you feel that anything coming in is moving you away from that, be cognizant of that and, avoid that. Number 7, be cognizant about the expectations of the money you're being given. Will this create another reporting barrier, another layer of reporting? I'm sure charter schools do not want another report. So keep in mind about that, and see the terms and conditions of the money you're given. All right, moving on to number 8, embrace the mindset of a nonprofit. And also have someone on your board that has nonprofit experience, not just education, like I talked about, the board makeup and things that, we look for in certain boards. These are things that you can look for. I'm not saying all your board members need to have nonprofit experience and all that. No, but maybe you can have 1 or 2 board members that are, have this nonprofit experience, so they think through these lenses. For example, maybe you're thinking about buying computers. You might have this board member that goes, hey, why are we buying computers? Should we see if any company in the Silicon Slopes is willing to donate some computers to us? They might be able to challenge and, just give a different frame of mind, because they come from, an experience of being on a nonprofit board or experience of, fundraising. Moving on to number 9, Develop communication material that includes a short elevator pitch and an email template that board members and others can use. Just develop some of this, short and succinct that anyone that, like your staff or people that, that are in your team, they have something that they can work with. Don't focus only on the dollars. Some donate in-kind donations. Some also donate consulting services. So receiving donations can be bigger than just the dollars that come in. Number 11, and I thought this one was pretty cool. Conduct a grandparent day where you can build relationships with them. The school let us know that grandparents, if they have a good relationship with the school, they usually donate and they're typically easier to work with. So, these are just some ideas, things you can think of. Number 12, put all effort into a few things and instead of trying to do everything, like I mentioned earlier, but also, don't be too quick to change. If you're stick to a program, do it for a few years, a few times, maybe like, for example, community events. The first time you do it might be a challenge, but do it a few times, you're better. But, stick to one or a couple of things instead of trying to do everything. Number 13, if using parents or volunteers to run things, make sure you clearly communicate your expectations and ensure that they're adequately monitored. You don't want, parents and volunteers saying something that's, not true, or something that's not, not who you are. So just make sure that you're aware of that. You're really monitoring, and you're kind of just overseeing the process. Number 14, have data that shows your donors impact, whatever that is, whatever it is, who you are. Just make sure you have some data. These are things that, are people that are looking to donate, they like to see data, they want to see these things, and be able to articulate, through the data, how their donations, can help students. Moving on to number 15, get your technology game on and spread the word through social media. When we think about social media, you're thinking about your Instagram, your Facebook. One of the schools that were successful with fundraising let us know, how many followers he has. And I can't remember the number, but it was a lot. I think like 4,000 or something. I mean, it was substantial. So, especially when you think about how, technology is pretty much everywhere and impacts every part of our life. So, make sure that you have a good media presence, a good online brand. Moving on to number 16, your school's brand image is very important. So we're not just talking about, your mission and vision, who you are. We're talking about your logo, your social media presence. Make sure these things align with your vision, with your mission and vision. Some of the logos and things that go on your, attires, school or clothes that you're selling, make sure these things are comfortable. We talked about I talked to someone where, on their social media, they have a lot of students that wear their beanies, that has their school's logo on it. It's, it's kind of cool, but if the beanie was a poor quality or not, wasn't good looking or whatever, people wouldn't want to wear it. So make sure that, your brand, your logo, all these things, just keep in mind these things are important and they actually are effective with your school. Number 17, with newer generations being more technology oriented, think about ways to appeal to them. Just think about, I guess, millennials, those are probably more the parents that, having the kids in schools. So just think about, how they interact, things might have changed from like other generations to now. So just keep in mind that, you might have to tweak your approach with some of these parents. Number 18, have a website landing page dedicated to fundraising. And I looked around a lot of LEAs and I found quite a few that had pages dedicated to this. But when I clicked on some of the links, maybe because, I wanted to donate or something, a lot of the links were broken, so make sure that you do have a page, all the links work, and you're, regularly updating that, whether that's quarterly, annually, but, that you're updating and everything works. Number 19, create a fundraising calendar and reach out to potential donors annually. The reason why this is important is because corporations or people, they might donate at certain times of the year. Maybe corporations donate, I'm just saying, in, I don't know, March or something, and maybe you ask them in April. So they're like, we've already done our yearly donations. So have a calendar, whether you're doing it like a fall or spring, it just keeps you more scheduled, keeps you more organized. So you are able to reach, your potential donors successfully, and, not just all doing it all at once. And you might miss out on some potential donations. And, the last tip here is keep your sponsors happy, be thankful, and stay in touch. Whatever you can do, just, make sure you're sending thank you notes, make sure you're keeping that relationship, and make sure you're just fostering a relationship. And going back again, you're telling your story, you're showing them how to be passionate and how the mission and vision of your school and how their donation can impact that. And just want to say thank you, everyone here. I don't know if we got any questions or anything here. You can
Stuart, I've been watching chat. There hasn't been any questions that have come through yet. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put those in or just unmute and you can ask those questions. That would be great.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay, well, it doesn't seem like we got any questions. If you have any further questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me. I also got permission from Tyler at Roots. He said he would love to show schools what he does. So if you have any questions, he's the one that does it, and he's the one that got over 15% of his revenues and donations. So he's a good resource. I think a question might have popped in, or
just a comment. They said, I love the idea of the fundraising landing page. So
awesome.
Great idea.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so now we will pass the time over to Smriti the call.
Stuart, there was one quick question that did pop up about, what else would you add on a fundraising landing page, like other than a donation link? Is there guidance or tips you would give as far as what you would include on that page?
I'll have to just see what's out there. I don't really know. So maybe I can get back to, looks like that's Jules. I can get back and, see some examples. I can send you some examples.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like I took a little bit more time than I wanted because I could not see my clock. So I'm going to pass it to Smriti, and then after Smriti is done, talk about internal control, she's going to pass it to the SPED team.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Good afternoon, everyone. Smriti Takal, Financial Compliance Auditor with the State Charter School Board. So today I'm going to be talking about internal controls, just the overview, importance, business administrators' roles, and some points to remember. So I'm going to share my screen real quick here. Can you see my screen, Marie? Awesome. Putting the
Yes, we can see your screen.
Thanks. I hit the presentation mode. Okay, here you go. Okay, so starting with the overview of internal controls. So internal controls, these are the checks and balances and methods and procedures established by a school to ensure they are conducting business in an orderly and efficient manner. So it's a process of safeguarding assets and resources, detecting and deterring errors, frauds, and thefts, and ensuring accuracy and completeness of accounting data. So, it helps produce reliable financial data and ensure adherence to the school's plans and policies. So basically, it needs to be a well understood system and practice at all levels within a school. And also it is required as per board rule R277-113, which is LEA fiscal and auditing policies. So, it's that mentions that LEA administration establish, document, and maintain an effective internal control system. So as such, it is recommended that you guys go over and visit, look at the rules and see what is required from your school. Moving on to the next slide, talks about the importance. So internal control assists management in carrying out their fiduciary duties and operating responsibilities. So they help to facilitate the preparation of timely and accurate financial reports. So, where in places where there are proper internal controls, once they are in place, schools ensure that timely and accurate financial reports are readily available to the stakeholders. For example, a bondholder might review a school's financial statements to make sure that school is complying with the debt agreements. And also, USB, there has might hold schools funds, withhold school funds when schools do not submit their required financial reports on time. Okay, moving on to the next point, ensure that school complies with the applicable federal and state laws and regulations. So, internal control example in this case would be a board member inquiring about compliance with the school's conflict of interest policy. So as a board member, just making sure that school has that and it has been in process. It's not just that it's available, but making sure it's a work in process and it has been followed through. Moving on to the next point, foster effective and efficient school operations. Again, another internal control example, it's a case of a school, in case it's implementing a new general ledger system, and they want to make sure that the implementation will be within the budget and that the resulting system will meet its desired business objectives. Moving on to some of the best practices to prevent internal control setbacks. Number one, segregation of duties. So typically schools have small administrative groups, making the segregation of duties quite difficult. However, it is important to separate the activities of three fundamental functions, which is the authorization, recording, and custody among staff members. For example, one staff signs on the authorization papers for the purchase of goods. The second staff actually keeps the custody of the goods, and the third one, makes payment regarding the purchase of that goods. Moving on to the next point, physical controls. So with so many people coming in and out of the schools, the risk of theft or damage is pretty high. So using some simple measures, physical controls can prevent damages or theft. For example, just lock up everything, and petty cash and checks should always be in safe. So if feasible, electronic access cards and cameras also are a good way of ensuring that you have proper controls in place to make sure no theft occurs within the school's area. Moving on to the next point, IT controls. So, you need to make sure schools' financial and administrative data are password protected with complex passwords that are changed regularly. So access to internal information, whether it's HR, finance, or other administrative data, should be limited to those who need it. Another point, accounting policies. So these policies help ensure that transactions are authorized, properly recorded, and not omitted from the records. For example, keeping a chart of account, proper approval steps, and sequential numbering. Okay, last but not the least, ethical training. Ethics training for all employees is one of the most important activities in internal controls. It will facilitate an ethical control environment across the organization. This mindset helps prevent and detect fraud and other unethical behavior. Moving on to the next slide, business administrator's role. So as a business administrator, where do you think your school needs internal control? Well, the answer to that question is everywhere. Because everything the school does revolves around internal control. So, you need to ensure that staff at all levels are aware and trained regarding their roles and responsibilities. Many of us think that internal controls are just financial related, like monitoring of restricted funds or doing proper program accounting, but that's not the case. There are general internal controls as well. For example, badging in and out, and password protection for your computers. Those are some of the examples of general controls. So as a business administrator, the focus should be on helping to establish internal control procedures. So the question is, what can BA do to influence board to get proper internal controls? So the role of a BA should be to help board understand the importance of internal controls. For example, proper program accounting, because if you don't do proper program accounting and record transaction at the right place, you'll have a tough time getting those reimbursed from the USBE. We've seen a lot of schools, that have had those issues, so we need to ensure that right documentation is there so that it can be forwarded to the USBE departments, so that the proper program accounting takes place and the schools get their money reimbursed as well. Okay. And also as a BA, you need to educate that internal control is not a red tape, because, a lot of times we think that, we might not get away with not doing it, but, that's not how it should be. It's a process that has to be followed by everyone. So, if you do not follow the process, it's chances are that you'll be in trouble sooner or later. Chances are that regulators will come knocking on your doors. So, it's recommended that we always follow the process from start to the end. Okay, next point. As a business administrator, you should be the one asking questions to program administrators and do proper budgeting accordingly. And also, business administrator is the best person to document and test internal controls, because, they have knowledge regarding financial controls. They can kind of leverage on that knowledge and move on to other areas of the schools, and meet with other department individuals, try to understand the process and look through and, provide their feedback. Okay, moving on to some of the points to remember. So internal control, again, is a process of having checks and balances, and schools need to have a process of checking and making sure things are being done as required per the rules and regulations. Also, one size does not fit all, and each school has unique situation and needs. Schools have different risks, as such, need to think through different internal control measures. And also, we need to match internal controls to risks, because risks in one school might be different than a risk that another school has. So you have to make sure that internal controls are designed in such a way that it is ready and it's there to mitigate the risks that your school faces. Okay. And also, we need to keep in mind that policies and procedures are also internal controls. We cannot think they are different, because policies and procedures meaning like, we want to make sure we are doing things in a correct manner. This is what internal control is all about. Okay. Another point, monitoring is essential to help ensure that internal control remains aligned with changing objectives and risks. There needs to be a continual process of improvement. We cannot just say, okay, now we have all the internal control that we think is there, and we cannot just sit back and relax. We have to go back, check, test, and readjust our internal controls to make sure we are meeting the needs of the changing environment. And also, school employees should always maintain and demonstrate a positive and supportive attitude towards internal controls. Everyone needs to be involved, and it needs to be within school's culture. Moving on to the last slide. I really liked how Stuart brought up this point of team support, how fundraising is part of a team support. It's same thing with internal controls. It's a team support. You cannot just have one person just do everything. It needs to be within the culture of the school. And also, strong and effective internal control can keep school out of trouble. Ignoring to establish effective internal controls will result in the regulators knocking on your door with questions. And there are dozens of cases each year for-profit and not-for-profit company who lose millions of dollars due to control failures, fraud, and misconduct. So I have an example here of costly control deficiency. In Norwich City School District, unpaid school lunch balances total $36,000 over a 16-month period. Adjustments were made to accounts without approval, and voids made by food service employees were not reviewed or approved. So there it is, a good example of a lack of proper internal controls. So, you need to beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. So this is coming from Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers. So basically the quote points out how it doesn't take much to derail a budget and ultimately your financial goals. So just a small leak can bring an enormous ship down. So too can, if you don't care about small expenses here and there, it can eventually sink your budget as well. So yeah, with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Be happy to take any questions at this time.
Marie, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marie. And from now, I would like to move the presentation over to Corey Erickson, who is here joining us from the SPED team, USBs, and he's here to present about special education.
Okay, thank you, Smriti. Just want to check, Stuart, how are we on time? Just want to be respectful of everybody's time that they have there.
Looks like, I mean, the time was only scheduled till about 1, so I don't know. Maybe you can just do a shorter version of what you have. I know I took a little bit too much time. I like to talk.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, I'll shoot for, 10 minutes or less on that there. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Is that showing for everybody?
Yes, that's showing well.
Okay, great. All right. All right, so in talking with Stuart, some of the items he had talked about, we're going to be covering those. Just a quick introduction. So my name's Corey Erickson. I'm a fiscal monitor in the over special education. Neil Stevens, who's also on this call, he's the team lead for special education in the fiscal monitoring. And then we have some of you may be familiar with Cole Shakespeare, who's the manager over fiscal monitoring. And we fall underneath the financial operations at USBE. So in talking with Stuart, some of the areas that the questions that he said have been asked have dealt with the maintenance of effort, time and effort reporting, and then some rules, some different scenarios that I think would be covered underneath the USBE, the Special Education Rules Manual. And so I think we'll go into a little bit of detail on the maintenance of effort, and then I'll give you some good references for time and effort reporting, and then special education, the rules, and some training for allowable costs. So maintenance of effort for LEAs to participate in the IDEA special education funding from the federal government, they require the LEAs to maintain their local and then their state and local spending. And so the maintenance of effort is the calculations done to show the federal government that you're maintaining your part of the spending for special educations, and so you're allowed to receive the IDEA funds. There's an option to be able to do that. Either LEAs could be calculating that, or the state agency, and USB has decided that we will go ahead and do that calculations for our LEAs. And so hopefully you've seen recently, each of our LEAs should have received a letter this last week, an email talking about how you had done for fiscal year 21 for the year that is completed. So some of the principles associated with maintenance of effort is that special education costs more than general education, that there's an incremental or an excess cost associated with special education above and beyond their general education funding. State and local resources must be used to support education costs, and students with disabilities receive general education first before the special education fundings are applied from either state and local or from the federal funds. And the federal funds are intended to supplement, not supplant. So what that means is it's supposed to be in addition, that when you receive federal funds, that you're not then diminishing what your state or your local funding is going to be used for. They want to make sure that that's still maintained. And then I referenced the federal regulations dealing with maintenance of effort there. In calculating it, and this is what's included in the letter, there's 4 different methods to be able to calculate how you're succeeding on maintaining your maintenance of effort. And you only have to meet one of those So either your local funding needs to be maintained or increased, your state and local combined, and then on a per capita or per student. So it's dividing your special education student counts into either your local or into your state and local combined funding there. So let's take a look at an example. So hopefully this looks a little familiar. So at the top, we have the 4 different categories: local funds, state and local, and then the per capita for local and the per capita for state and local. So in this example, the LEA started in fiscal year 2016, and they had $500 in local funds, $950 in state and local. And then in this scenario, we have 10 special ed students, so their per capita was 50 for local and 95 for state and local. The next year, in fiscal year 17, they spent $400 in local. And so they were less than what they were before. So their local did not meet maintenance of effort, but they spent their state and local $950. So that met their maintenance of effort. And so their per student for local was under, but then they met it. So for fiscal year 17, they met it for 2 of the 4 categories. And then fiscal year 18, they spent $500. That now has met, but they only did $900 for state and local, so that did not meet. If, let's say in fiscal year 17, their state and local was $960, that becomes the new high water mark that they would need to meet. So for fiscal year 18 or going forward, to meet state and local, they would have need to have spent $960. So each time you increase, that becomes your new high water mark that you would need to meet to be able to meet that. But again, you just have to meet one of those 4 categories each year, and it can change each year to qualify. So there's some exceptions. So if an LEA has not met, there's some reasons why you can do an exception that will modify your funding, that would bring it down below. And those 4 are either a departure of a special education personnel. So if your special education director had left, and then either it took a while to get a new hire, or you hired somebody that was a lower pay, that difference in pay, you'd be able to reduce your maintenance of effort obligation that you needed to reach there. The next one is decrease of enrollment. So if you have fewer children with disabilities, and that's something that we include in the calculations automatically that we include. Third one is a termination of an obligation of a special education child that's in an exceptionally costly program. So if there was something, either, intensity therapy or things like that you had that no longer is needed, the costs associated with that. And then termination of a long-term acquisition that you've been paying for, but you've paid those off or you're no longer continuing. That can be something to reduce your maintenance of effort obligation. And then if the assumption of the high cost fund operated by the SEA, that we're picking that up, would be an additional. So those are the ones that the 5 obligations or exceptions that the federal government does allow us to be able to modify your maintenance of effort calculations. Jumping over to allowable costs. This question is, what is allowed for special education? And really the overriding factor is if you look at, is it aligned with the special education students' individual education program? So their IEP, does it align to support that student, is a good indicator of whether or not that cost would be allowed. And again, we want it to supplement, not supplant, state funds. And some of the criteria associated that you'd want to look at is is the cost necessary? Do I really need to do this to be able to meet the IEP for that student? Is it reasonable? Am I paying, $500 for a hammer? That type of reasonableness. Is it a reasonable cost that I'm paying for it? And then is it electable to special education programs? And that means, can it be distributed? Is it capable of being distributed to the program there? You want consistent treatment of, if it's indirect, if you have a secretary that she was indirect on one federal program, then she would need to be indirect for all federal programs. You wouldn't be able to say, well, it's direct for this program, but not for this other program. In sake of time, we'll jump ahead here. There's some resources available that you can go to. So if you go to the, and again, I'll have Stuart pass on these slides. There's rules that provide documentation showing the different, what's allowable, what's not allowable. So I gave you the path here, but then you can also jump directly to it with, I've had a link in there. And then we've actually done a training, a webinar. It's about an hour and a half that goes through allowable costs. There's the training and the documents associated with it. And then the same is true for time and effort. There's, we could spend quite a bit of time on that. What's allowable? What do I need to report for my staffing? And how do I need to reflect that? We have a training webinar that goes into the federal requirements, documentation standards, which staff needs to be compliant, and then resources. And so on this, the USB website, we have the time and effort. There's this training from May 27th of 21. Either you can click the link or just follow that path there. And it's an excellent resource to be able to drill down more specifically, probably some of the questions that you have on that. So that's a sweet and condensed version of that. So Stuart, any questions or?
I don't see any questions through the chat. It looks like there is a request for the recording. So, okay, we'll get that sent out when this is all done. I don't see any questions, Corey. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. As Stuart mentioned, we will send this out and we appreciate spending some of your afternoon with you. We do have another board member, or excuse me, business manager training next week on Thursday as well. And that will be with State Charter School Board member Eric Olson, talking about procurement. So hopefully you can join us for that. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we will hopefully see you next week.